Poverty, the plague that haunts America. And one of the largest stakeholders in this plague is the fact of the decline in quality of education. Good afternoon, my name is Veda Ubale.
My name is Sofia Vargas.
My name is Amina Mahiro.
And I'm Nicole Master. The research question that we chose was, what effect does a decline in the quality of education have on generational poverty? The answer to our question was that the decline in the quality of education has a proportionally negative effect on generational poverty.
First, we can find that relying on local government is a huge issue in assistance with education. According to the Economic Policy Institute, heavy reliance of funding is on local government. Additionally, Michael Hartney from the Boston Colleges states that local governments lack basic democracy as they have lower turnouts and more biased election results. As we can see in this graph by the Brookings Institute, almost more than $5 billion of education funding comes from local government, and almost little to none is from the state level. This allows for local governments to have a better impact and influence on the way that resources and funding is allocated towards these schools.
Adding on to Veda's point, the local government makes up a majority of the funding that schools receive, and this is determined by property taxes as explained by the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, that property taxes are based on the market value of the homes in the neighborhoods. Now, in high-income neighborhoods, people are paying more property taxes, which means that the schools receive more funding. The inverse is seen in low-income neighborhoods, where people pay less property taxes, and thus the schools receive less funding. This is only leading to the disparity in education, as these schools are not receiving the funding that they need in order to get the resources that they need for their students. In this graph by NPR, you can see the yellow zones are the national average of school districts of what they pay for their schools, with the blue and green zones being above the national average and the orange and red being below the national average. This vast difference between the school districts is leading to the disparity, as students are not receiving equal education. They are not receiving the same resources that they need in order to be successful. And these low-income neighborhoods, they're only at a disadvantage due to the low quality of their education, as they do not have the same spending budgets as schools in high-income neighborhoods, which means that they lack the resources that they need, including textbooks, technology, and teachers, due to the salary. Ward, Pouncey et al., all being university professors, they all explain that poor schools are at an educational disadvantage because of their lower spending abilities, and this is only contributing to the educational disparities. The graph by Politics at Work shows the difference that wealthy school districts pay compared to what poor districts pay. The red, green, and orange sections show the funds from the federal government, the state government, and the local government respectively. This is showing that because the local government makes up a majority of the funds that schools receive, that wealthy school districts are receiving more in funding, which is leading to the inequity in education, as those students are going to get the higher quality education compared to the students in these low-income neighborhoods. And wealth and income is not only applied to schools, it is also applied to families. Families from high-income backgrounds are able to pay for more resources to enrich their children's education, such as tutors, textbooks, and private schools. Families from low-income neighborhoods are not able to afford these resources, and the students are not receiving such an enriched education. Breno Braga et al. From Urban Institute state that the U.S. wealth gap is fueled by an education and upward mobility gap. As climbing the socioeconomic ladder depends on the level of education that one receives, that it will be increasingly difficult for these students to climb that ladder because they will not be able to receive a higher education level due to the wealth gaps. This graph from the Russell Sage Foundation shows the comparison between what wealthy families pay for their students' educations versus what poorer families pay for their students' educations. The gap has only increased over the years, which is leading to the wealth gap and is making it more difficult for students to escape the cycle of generational poverty.
Addressing of learning styles is often a key point in the conversation of an efficient education. However, this may not be interpreted how is usually portrayed. According to Michael Swegstra at Fraser Institute, even though opinion surveys show that most adults and teachers believe in individual learning styles, it remains a theory without supporting evidence. The reason this is harmful to one's education, however, is because it promotes a fallacy about how students actually learn. Because by preparing and promising students a better education based on a specific learning style, you are preparing them for failure, because you are placing them into the comfort and of their own said capabilities, limiting their potential and competence. Not to mention the burden placed on teachers, since they need to work harder to accommodate for each learning style. As you can see here, there are 3 different here: kinesthetic, auditory, and visual, with a bottom note that says that one person is not just one, but it can be a mix of all of them. Swakstra goes on to say that this concept, often referred to as differentiated instruction, is a common expectation placed on teachers by school boards. Supported by Mike Schmoker, speaker, author, and consultant of education on Education Weekly, educators have been often required to integrate differentiated instruction into all their lessons. This connects back to a lack of funding, since teachers might be having to work even harder, and not being able to be paid is an issue.
Tying back to Sophia's point about talking about educational disparities in the classroom, we have technological disparities. Would your schools get more technology than those that have a low income? And produces inequality. Will your schools experience excessive screen time and reliance on digital devices that can lead to a decrease in critical thinking skills and a lack of engagement in deep intellectual content? It is a fact that technology is now really present in our daily life, and this can be an obstacle for students to get all the information that they need. Technological innovations such as phones and computers can bring a numerous amount of distractions to the process of learning. It can be harmful as technology, it's a factor that has a great impact on distractions due to the multiple applications that exist in these devices, putting at risk the focus and disposition of the students to finish their academical studies. According to Laura Serra, Executive Creative Director at Mosaic North America, for instance, some empirical students found that most students often adopt mobile devices for activities unrelated to formal learning, such as playing games. This is a clear demonstration of how the free access to technology all the time can lead to the bad use of it and be a form of distraction, creating as a result students with no motivation to learn and grow academically. In addition, these devices can not work properly all the time, which leads to education being disrupted. As here in the graph, we can see how the 2 biggest factors are that they don't pay attention and the misinstruction, which leads back to the negative impacts of technology in the classroom. While other schools do not get enough technology, which also results in damage. When students do not get sufficient technological resources, it can negatively impact their student performance. And unfortunately, low-income families experience a digital divide, which means that they have limited access to the information that they need. So we should address this problem so we give equal opportunities for all students.
Now let's look at the overall impact of this. Climbing the social ladder depends on the continued educational attainment, and like we've already proved, educational attainment is difficult for a lot of these groups, and because of their lack of ability to move economically, it makes it even more difficult for these families to live in a low-income status, leading to generational poverty as low-quality education doesn't allow for the advancement of students.
This problem all begins with unreformed policies, as that is leading to the lack of funding that schools are experiencing, which affects the quality of the education of these schools. Now that leads into educational disparity, which then ties into the inability for these students to continue to get a higher education due to the gaps in their education, which leads for them to not be able to climb the social ladder, as it depends on the level of education that they attain, and this leads back to the cycle of generational poverty, which entraps many people who do not receive a high quality education.
Some solutions we came up with were electing better leaders into office. Having better leaders leads to better decisions made by these people. The second was to reform school funding so that it was not overly dependent on the local government. So property taxes was one of them. However, the limitations included that people in government depend on the citizens to vote for them. So if a person does not have the majority vote, they will not be able to change the funding. The second was reforming school funding will require major reallocations of money from other areas on the federal level in order to cover all schools. However, and because of that, we chose solution 2, because reforming schools are easier than reforming the way that funding is done by a large group of people is a lot easier than getting a large group of people to vote for one person. Thank you.
Always has to be one. Veda, we'll start with you. Veda, can you please tell me how you chose to use Sophia's paper in this presentation?
So we used Sophia's paper mainly as a backbone of proving our point, as she effectively proved the point that moving through the social ladder is heavily dependent on the economic status of a lot of people, and that then relies on the fact of their ability to get a good education, overall impacting our way of proving our point that generational poverty is an outcome of the lack of quality of education.
Nicole, reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the situation?
I would have to say Sophia's paper had the greatest impact on my understanding, because hers was economic and that tied into my funding of the school. So based on different areas you're from or where you're located, that definitely has an impact on your education level, thus impacting if you're staying in generational poverty or not.
All right. Camila, what's an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' reports you decided not to use, and then why?
Actually, one compelling argument that we decided not to use was mine about my paper. I did the research about the negative impacts of AI in education, and that was an argument that we found that it was not supportive of our whole resolution.
All right, and save the best for last. Describe an argument from one of your peers. No, let's not do that one. If you had a fifth member of your team, what could they add to it that would add to the overall presentation?
If we had a fifth member of our team, I would say that it would have been beneficial for them to take a historical view of our topic, because that way you can see the progression of the events that led to the problem and how it is now. As through a historical lens, you are able to see the policies that were enacted and why they were not reformed. You can see the economic implications of the entire issue, how technology has played a part of it, how teachers and their learning of how students themselves learn, how that all ties into education and a good quality education. So seeing that through a historical lens and seeing the progression of how that has progressed through society would have added more depth to our topic.
Stay here. You guys are